Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Got a great show for you tonight. We're going to be talking all about leaky brain, leaky gut, and what you can do to overcome neurological issues, especially with a twist or with an emphasis on gluten. So stick with me to the very end. We're going to be talking about very specific strategies that you can take upon, and also we're going to be talking about certain nutrients that you might want to consider adding to your regimen if you've already gone gluten-free and continue to struggle with neurological problems. So that being said, we're going to dive right in. If you're new to the show, kind of crash course in the way that it works. Number one, don't be a stranger, say hi, tell me where you're tuning in from. Number two, if you have questions, go ahead and pipe those into the feed now. I do those first come, first serve basis, and I'm going to answer as many as I have time to answer and try to keep it relevant to the topic. I'm going to pick questions that are relevant to the topic over the ones that are not. So let's dive in. How gluten can destroy your brain and nervous system. This is a topic near and dear to my heart because in my practice I see a lot of people with neurological problems. Everything from neuropathy to whether it's small fiber neuropathy, whether it's nerve damage, muscular weakness. We see a lot of people as well with demyelinating diseases like multiple sclerosis. We see a lot of people with neurological diseases of the brain. And so near and dear to my heart because I see so many people do so well and so wonderful, recover from what they thought was permanent damage or neurological problem, or you know, as most doctors will tell patients, we don't know why you have that neuropathy or that nerve damage, but here's a drug to fix it. It's just wonderful to see those types of people make comebacks and prove everyone wrong. But before we dive in, let's talk about leaky brain. I think this is a pretty important topic to understand. Leaky brain, here we go, we're changing colors. Leaky brain is a concept that's becoming more and more recognized in medical literature. Now, you've all probably heard of leaky gut. Leaky gut, otherwise sometimes referred to as intestinal hyperpermeability. So leaky gut is, again, been very well researched. We know it exists. We know it's an issue. If you have a doctor telling you there's no such thing as leaky gut, run as fast as you can because I haven't read a medical journal in years. But we know this exists, but now what we're learning is that this right here, this leaky brain component also exists. Now, there's a barrier in your gut, right? There's this, if we look at kind of the GI tract itself, there's a single layer of cells that line the barrier of the GI tract. And so what happens is in between each one of these cells, there's an anchor protein that holds these cells together. It basically keeps this junction tight. So as food comes into your gut, food's coming this way, right? It has nowhere to go. It has to properly be broken down and digested. Once it's done that, it can be allowed into the cell and then subsequently into your bloodstream. But a leaky gut is when you have a gap, right? And these anchors are broken, these anchor proteins. And so now food proteins, bacterial proteins, things can leak in. Okay, and it's in a nutshell, a very short crash course on leaky gut. Well, the same thing can happen in the brain. So what we're looking at here in this diagram is a blood vessel, right? And we basically chopped it down the center and we're looking into the blood vessel. So imagine the blood's coming at you, right? But this area right here, those are tight junctions in your blood-brain barrier. Just like you have the tight junctions here in your gut barrier, you have tight junctions in your blood-brain barrier. And we know that certain things can cause disruption of your blood-brain barrier, allowing things to leak into the brain. This is actually where we're seeing more and more medical research document this happening. And so some of the things that we know can happen is that leaky gut has to be there first. So for the most part, for most people, leaky gut happens first. And so when things leak into your bloodstream here, they have the ability to go to the brain and create problems. But one of the things that happens is the components that leak through, we make antibodies, IgG, IgM, and other antibodies against these food proteins or against the components within the actual GI tract itself. And one of the things that's actually been measured is something called LPS. LPS stands for lipopolysaccharide, and what that compound is it's basically bacterial poop. Okay, to put it simply, it's a byproduct of bacterial production. And once they create this compound, if there's a leakage, it can get straight in, and we know that LPS can disrupt the blood-brain barrier. We know that other things that cause inflammation can disrupt the blood-brain barrier. So we've identified, systemic inflammation as contributing to damage to these tight junctions along the blood-brain barrier. And when that happens, again, the toxins and the other things that float around in your bloodstream can leak in. And when they leak in, guess what's behind that? We've got neurons that can be damaged, right? So neurons within the brain itself. We've got other types of cells within the brain that help the brain repair and detoxify. And if chemical toxins are leaking past those barriers, we can damage neurological tissue, leading to a variety or a battery of different types of neurological symptoms. We'll talk about what those are here in just a minute, but I want you to understand the concept is that we know leaky gut can contribute to leaky brain, which then basically it predisposes your brain to all types of chemical onslaught and problems. So this next image, let's move that over just a little bit. What we're looking at is what we understand to a certain extent about the gut-brain connection. So in science, they're now pointing out this what's called gut-brain axis, right? It's this connection between your gut and your brain. And if you've ever had a gut feeling, a lot of people talk about, having a gut feeling. There's a reason why you have a gut feeling. The gut talks to the brain. Remember that your gut is the third largest nervous system in your body. It's got more neurons than your entire spinal cord. So it's very, very large in terms of its richness in nerves, and it communicates very aggressively with your central nervous system. So when we see abnormal gut function can lead to abnormal central nervous system function. And vice versa. Abnormal gut function also causes gut problems. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people with gut issues like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel syndrome, we've linked it with celiac disease. We know these individuals have greater risk of the development of neuropathies, of schizophrenia-like behavior, bipolar, of depression, and a number of other neurological problems. So one of the things that happens when you have, again, increased gut permeability is you get this intestinal dysbiosis or abnormal bacteria. Those bacterial products are leaking in. Remember, I just mentioned that LPS is one of those. So that's altered levels of LPS leaking into the bloodstream, inflammatory cells and inflammatory mediators creating problems, and that leads to, again, alterations in the blood-brain barrier, the BBB, if you will, which can alter the way we think and the way our nervous system reacts and works. Whereas on the other side, so if this is an abnormal gut leading to abnormal nervous system function, over here we have healthy, right? So we have a healthy gut, healthy bacteria in communication with the brain, in communication with the colon, and there's a synergy of good health that occurs as a result, as opposed to what we see on this other side. So I want you to understand a very strong connection between the gut and the brain, and leaky brain is fastly becoming a very, very well recognized scientific phenomenon in medical science. So what happens when we have a leaky brain is this entire cascade of things can begin to happen. So neurologically speaking, we develop a host of different types of problems when we have a leaky brain, or at least we increase the risk for developing these problems. You see here migraine headaches, epilepsy or seizure disorder. So why is this important? Many of you go to your doctor, right? You've been told you have epilepsy. You've been told you have a seizure disorder. You've been diagnosed with a migraine headache. Some of you go to your doctor, you've been diagnosed with depression or anxiety. I see this a lot. You're dizzy all the time and you don't know why, so they call it vertigo or ataxia. Some of you have got a diagnosis, of mental disorder like schizophrenia. I talked last week about attention deficit disorder, attention hyperactivity, attention deficit hyperactivity, and autism. We talked a little bit about last week. Facial palsies, another one. So conditions like Bell's palsy, where your facial control starts to droop. Multiple sclerosis and ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. If you remember a number of years ago, those ice bucket challenges, that was, for Lou Gehrig's disease. These are demyelinating conditions, right? And then neuropathy. A lot of you don't, you may not have one of these major systemic diseases, but you have nerve pain. You have numbness and tingling in your hands and feet, right? And then something called complex regional pain syndrome, which is a very, very intense type of pain. It's oftentimes also referred to as reflex sympathetic dystrophy. So if you've had either one of those diagnoses, look, these are the neurological manifestations of leaky brain, right? And one of the things that we absolutely are sure can cause leaky gut to leaky brain is exposure to gluten. As a matter of fact, we know that gluten exposure to even people that are not celiac, so there's a term you've heard me use a number of times, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So even if you don't have celiac disease, we know that gluten can still cause leaky gut, leading to, again, the neurological manifestations. And that's, some doctors and researchers believe that gluten by itself is a neurotoxin, and they're right. But one of the things we've also identified is there's a type of antibody that once we're exposed to gluten, our immune system looks at that gluten as an enemy, and it starts to overreact, and it starts to produce an antibody to nerve tissue. And so this is one of the mechanisms of action in which gluten can actually create neurological damage. So, these are all things, interestingly enough, these are all things that can be measured. Unfortunately, most doctors won't spend a whole lot of time measuring these things. They like to give you a name, right? They give you the name, you have migraine headache, you have epilepsy, you have depression. And raise your hand if you're watching tonight, if you've gone to your doctor and you struggled with any of these conditions, and your doctor said, here's your diagnosis, we don't know what causes it, and then proceeded to write you a prescription for some type of medication, even though they didn't know what caused it. If you've had that happen to you, I'd like you to just chime in and share with us tonight, because it's very, very common. I see it all the time. People are told you have a disease, we don't know why, but we know how to solve it, here's the drug. That makes no sense. Giving the drug when we don't know what causes it doesn't really fix you. It masks the problem, and if it's a neurological problem, the danger there, especially when you have neuropathy, remember, nerves are slow to heal. So if you mask your neurological pain with a medicine, and common medicines that are given for this, oftentimes anti-inflammatories, steroids are commonly given, drugs like gabapentin, which is oftentimes used for neurological pain, and I've even seen the oxycodone and some of the bigger heavy hitter opiates be prescribed for neurological pain. But nerves are slow to heal, and so if you have nerve damage, you want to find out why. You want to get to the why as quickly as possible, because if you mask the damage, you have, let's say you're on a medicine for multiple years, now you've got additional years of damage that are compiling. And so when you finally get around to making the decision that you're going to get to the why, you've lost several years to damage. And on top of losing those several years, it takes a very long time for nerves to heal. So a lot of people, when they start getting to this, when they start figuring this out, and then they take action, like a gluten-free diet, or correcting nutritional deficiencies or whatever else might be contributing to that nerve damage, it takes longer, right? So it takes longer. And we live in this world today, unfortunately, where people want what they wanted yesterday, right? Most people are impatient. They don't understand the concept of healing, and nerves just heal more slowly than other tissues. So if you're starting to manifest neurological problems, the most important thing that you can do is get to the why as quickly as you possibly can, so as not to allow for years of damage to occur repetitively over time. But again, I just want to reemphasize, every single condition that you see on the board here, every single one has been linked clinically, anecdotally, as well as in medical research to gluten exposure. We know gluten can contribute to these illnesses. So if you've got any one of these diagnoses, if you've got a family member with any one of these diagnoses, if you've got a friend or loved one with any one of these diagnoses, you need to share this information with them because it has the potential to save them from years of grief. I mean, I can just speak of a couple of really major experiences that I've seen. I had a woman one time in a wheelchair, diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, came to see me. We were able to get her out of her wheelchair. I mean, many of you may have heard of Dr. Terry Walls, who runs a foundation for MS patients. She was actually wheelchaired as well, and through diet change and lifestyle change was able to walk and live and enjoy life again. So I know oftentimes diseases like MS can be very scary because the diagnosis seems like it's a life sentence to torment and torture and hopelessness. But I want you to take heart that if you have a neurological diagnosis, then you really want to explore gluten as a major contributing factor here. So, is gluten a brain and nerve toxin? It absolutely is. We know that gluten causes leaky gut first, right? So this is number one. This leaky gut leads to chemicals like LPS. It leads to the production of antibodies. It leads to an inflammatory response. And all of these things we are certain of can cause blood-brain barrier damage, leading to leaky brain, and that in and of itself can manifest, right, as neurological disease. And so what do we do? What do you do about it, right? We have to stop this cascade of events from happening. So what we have to do is we got to recognize that gluten might be playing a role. Now, that's not to say that all nerve diseases are only caused by gluten. I want to be clear about that too. There certainly are other factors at play here. But if you've got any one of those conditions and your doctor has not done this is very important. You ask for this, HLA-DQ genotyping. Now, it's important that you ask for the right kind of HLA-DQ genotyping. So if you're going to one of these like genetic testing mills online, what they don't do, they run a SNP test. They run what's called a SNP where they're looking for what are called 2s and 8s. And the reason they're looking for HLA-DQ 2s and 8s is because their association with celiac disease. Unfortunately, people with 2s and 8s don't oftentimes manifest their gluten exposure as neurological damage. The ones that we're concerned with are the ones with HLA-DQ 1 and 3. So nerve damage, gluten-induced nerve damage. So if you've gone and done one of those online tests and they told you you were fine, you didn't have predisposing HLA-DQ markers to celiac, it's very possible you could have the non-celiac gluten-sensitive genetic markers that none of them test for. So very, very important that you ask for the right test when you do this. So if you ask your doctor and they don't know what you're talking about, go visit Gluten-Free Society. There's a genetic testing service that they offer, and you can get this type of thing measured. But you'll want to get it measured because if it's the case, that will be your justification for getting gluten out of your diet. The quicker you do that, the quicker you stop this cascade from occurring, the quicker you stop that from happening. Again, the faster you can if your nerves are being damaged by gluten, the faster you're going to heal. So it's important to catch this super early because if you don't, again, that damage going on for a long time equally takes a long time for it to come back and heal. Now, many of you are probably saying, Dr. Osborne, what are you crazy? Gluten doesn't cause nerve damage. It's only celiac, right? So what I've done, I'm showing you a few different research studies here. This was a great review that was published in the Journal of Headache and Pain. And so here's what they found. Migraine has been associated with celiac disease, and the condition should be searched particularly in patients with migraine that also have occipital and parieto-occipital calcification on brain neuroimaging. In those patients, gluten-free diet can also be effective in reducing migraine frequency. It's been proposed that migraine may be improved by dietary approaches with beneficial effects on gut bacteria. Remember the gut-brain axis we were talking about? And gut-brain axis, including appropriate consumption of fiber, as well as low glycemic diets. Remember, sugar damages nerves, so it's not just gluten. And supplementation with vitamin D, very important. Vitamin D is very beneficial and very helpful in neurological function, as well as omega-3 and potentially probiotics. So in this comprehensive review, linking gluten to migraine headaches, which again, neurological in nature. In this study published in the Journal of Neurology, so notice this is two studies. This was published in 2018. And this is not, this is not Men's Health Magazine, folks. This is the Journal of Neurology, one of the most peer-reviewed and most prolific journals as it relates to neurology. This is too, Journal of Neurology, published in this year, right, 2021. So you can see here, gluten neuropathy, prevalence of neuropathic pain, and the role of the gluten-free diet. The summary here is this: in this study, strict gluten-free diet was associated with lowering the odds of peripheral neuropathy pain by 88.7%. It's almost 90% reduction in peripheral neuropathic pain. So if you're struggling with neurological pain and you don't know why, again, your doctor's pumping you full of medicines, nobody's asked this question about gluten. Proof is in the pudding, folks. You want to get this investigated as quickly as possible. So conclusion here, neuropathic pain is very prevalent in gluten neuropathy. That's what GN stands for, and is associated with poor mental health status, right? Because when you hurt all the time, when your nerves are in pain all the time, you don't think clearly. You get really frustrated and depressed. A strict gluten-free diet might be protective, as it's associated with a significant reduction of the odds of peripheral neuropathic pain associated to gluten neuropathy. So major study done, another major study done, gluten neuropathy, and this one was on HLA associations. I mentioned this a minute ago. This is genetic associations. What they found is that people that tended to have gluten-induced neuropathy had a gene pattern that was not your typical celiac gene pattern. So important, again, if you're going to do genetic testing, that you order the right test, lest you get this false negative thought process in your brain where your doctor says, oh, you don't have celiac genes, you don't have to worry about it. These folks, these are not the traditional celiac genes that are being tested here. These are, again, non-celiac gluten-sensitive genes associated with the development of neurological manifestations. So you see the conclusion here: gluten neuropathy is a late manifestation of gluten sensitivity. In celiac disease, the majority of patients have the length-dependent neuropathy with a linear deterioration over time. HLA genotyping of gluten sensitivity in celiac patients who suffer from neuropathic symptoms is recommended, as it can help in identifying patients at risk for developing sensory ganglionopathy, which is a form of neuropathy. So, the research across the board, and I could talk all night, folks, about the research. I could have pulled up another 150 studies for you, but I just didn't want to bore you to death with academia. But I want you to understand that the research on this is very, very strong and has been around for quite a long time. I want to jump into another topic on this topic, which is gluten can cause major problems with malnutrition. So one of the things that gluten does, right, is it damages the GI tract, leading to malabsorption, so leading to a reduction of vitamins and mineral absorption, so malnutrition in a sense, right? One of the other things that gluten can do is it creates chronic inflammation. Anytime your body's chronically inflamed, one of the things it's going to need more of, one of the things it's going to use more of is nutrients. So chronic inflammation causes loss of nutrition, because what's happening is your body's trying to put out the fire. Your body is trying to put out the inflammation, right? It's trying to reduce it. And what does your body use to reduce inflammation? It uses nutrients. Nutrients are what we use to modulate and control inflammation. And so when you're chronically inflamed, your body's burning through more of your nutrients, okay, in an effort to try to keep your body let's say as protected as possible. But if this goes on indefinitely, if this inflammation becomes multi-year chronic inflammation, then this loss of nutrition is compounded over many years, and we end up more and more nutritionally deprived. Well, many nutrients, when they're low, many nutrient deficiencies actually cause neurological damage and neurological disease. So it's important. Let's just make a little bit of room here. So if we look at just what I've got here on the board, this is a short list. We could talk for months about each one of these nutrients and what they can cause and what they can do. But As an example, B12 helps to produce myelin. Myelin is the insulator, right? If your nerve, as your nerve, so I don't know how many of you took biology in school, but nerves kind of look like this, right? And so along the body of the nerve, you have these big bubbles of fat, and they serve as insulators for that nerve. So if this is the cell body of the nerve and the nerve is transmitting electricity down the nerve, these nodes or tips, these are called myelin. And what happens when we are B12 deficient is we get areas where the myelin won't grow, won't build. So imagine this area here, there's no insulation, and so the nerve fizzles out. The message doesn't make it where it's supposed to go. It doesn't get to communicate to that next nerve. So that demyelinization, this is where we'll see diseases like multiple sclerosis kick in, and this is why people with MS develop neurological symptoms, sensory neurological symptoms, but also they lose their ability to use their limbs and legs, so they develop down the nerves, they develop loss of nerve function to the muscle, and that leads to muscle atrophy. And again, it can put them in wheelchairs, it can make them non-functional. So B12 is very, very important because it plays a role in myelin production. Now, B12 also plays a role in the regulation of a chemical called homocysteine. Homocysteine is a nerve toxin. So when homocysteine levels are elevated, we know that homocysteine can cause apoptosis of nerve cells. It can cause the death of nerve cells. And we see the same thing with folate. So folate actually plays a role in that as well. Folate regulates homocysteine. B12 regulates homocysteine. So too does vitamin B6. So these three B vitamins kind of work in tandem with each other to control homocysteine, a known nerve toxin that can cause, again, the damage and the destruction of nerve cells. So these are very, very important. Now, that's not all. Folate is also important for the development, so neurological development. So in babies, if you've ever heard of a neural tube defect, this is one of the reasons why most OB-GYNs and doctors will recommend that you take a good multivitamin during pregnancy that has folate in it, right? It's because folate prevents neural tube defects, and which is one of the most common birth defects. It's a neurological birth defect in children, and so folate's very important for that as well. But in adults, folate, again, plays this role here. Vitamin B6 plays a role in multiple chemical reactions that help with neurotransmitters. So your neurotransmitters, for example, dopamine, primary neurotransmitter in the brain. Serotonin, primary neurotransmitter in the brain. Guess what? You can't make dopamine and serotonin without vitamin B6. It just won't happen. You can't make serotonin without folate. It just can't happen. So if you are, gluten sensitive and you've been eating gluten the majority of your adult life, and that gluten has damaged you to the level where these nutrients are now depleted, you're going to have a harder time making dopamine. What is dopamine? It's sometimes referred to as a happy neurotransmitter, a happy hormone, but technically it's a neurotransmitter. Serotonin, also sometimes referred to as a mood-stabilizing neurotransmitter. Dopamine also helps regulate motor control or muscle control. This is why people with Parkinson's disease, their dopamine areas of their brain are destroyed, and they get tremors, right? They get what's called intentional tremors. They start having abnormal gaits because they don't have adequate dopamine to control their motor coordination. So very, very important chemicals for the nervous system. But you also need vitamin B6 to produce adrenaline and noradrenaline, which are primary neurochemicals involved in the sympathetic nervous system reactivity and function. Now, B1, very important for the nervous system. Why do we need B1? Let's make some room here. B1 plays a role in the production. We can't make acetylcholine. Now, many of you struggle with what's referred to as sympathetic dominance. Sympathetic dominance is when you've been inflamed for years and you've been under stress for years. Your sympathetic nervous system is highly activated and highly turned up and ramped up. And the sympathetic nervous system is the opposite of digestion, right? So when your sympathetic tone is too great, you won't digest well, you won't sleep well, you won't heal well. Well, vitamin B1 helps with this. How? It produces acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the primary neurotransmitter that runs the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the nervous system that helps you sleep, heal, repair, right? Rest. And if you don't have adequate B1, this part of your nervous system won't work appropriately. It won't work properly. And so if you're already in a sympathetic dominance, you get stuck there. And this is where B1 can play a major role. Now, if you've ever heard of the disease beriberi, it's also sometimes the disease state associated with vitamin B1 deficiency, but beriberi affects the nervous system. There's actually a form of beriberi called dry beriberi, which predominantly affects your brain and your nerves. And vitamin B1 deficiency can lead to abnormal thoughts, abnormal behaviors. It can also lead to neuropathy, muscle weakness, and a number of other neurological symptoms. So B1 is very, very important, and it's pretty commonly deficient in people with gluten issues. And all this in this list that I've got on the board for you here, this is probably number one in terms of what we see with gluten sensitivity. Again, that's just this list here. And then B3, vitamin B3 can cause an inflammation that can affect the mind. And as a matter of fact, late stage vitamin B deficiency, B3 deficiency, is called pellagra. And this can literally, I'm going to use a non-medical term for you folks, it can make you crazy, right? Pellagra actually causes a schizophrenic-like tendency in the mind. So if your B3 deficiency is severe enough and you've started to develop early stage pellagra, it can literally make your mind not be able to properly think. It can make you go crazy. So very, very important that you understand these B vitamin deficiencies are very, very common in people with gluten issues because of the malabsorption that can happen, but also because of the gluten-induced inflammation that can occur. Then we've got vitamins like vitamin E. Vitamin E is a very potent antioxidant, and one of the things that it does is it helps to protect the myelin. So where this vitamin E is important is it protects that myelin, which is made out of fat, this myelin is. And vitamin E is what we like to call in chemistry the great fat protector. It helps to preserve the fatty substances and the fatty membranes within the body, but it helps to protect that myelin from premature deterioration. And then we have alpha lipoic acid. There have been a lot of really great studies on alpha lipoic acid. Actually, as a matter of fact, one here a few years ago found, it was an animal study, but it found that alpha lipoic acid helped restore the blood-brain barrier in animals with vascular inflammation where they had blood-brain barrier damage. So alpha lipoic acid is a B vitamin-like compound. Technically, it's not a B vitamin, but it's close in relation to the B vitamins, and it can be very, very beneficial as an antioxidant, but also to protect the blood-brain barrier. And then copper as well. Copper is very crucial because copper, like B12, copper helps B12 produce the myelin, right, around your nerves. And so a copper deficiency can actually cause neuropathy. You can get demyelinating disease as a result of copper deficiency. So again, I could go on and on, folks, about nutrient associations to the nervous system, but I wanted to just drive home the point. I wanted you to understand the concept so that you could take action on it. And so what's the action really that you should take, like based on all these things that we're saying? What can you do, right? What can you do? If you walk away from this show tonight with any kind of action steps, let's talk about what those need to look like. Number one, if you've got a neurological disease, get the proper HLA-DQ testing to identify whether or not gluten's an issue for you. And don't you remember what I said, don't just have them run celiac genes, we want to run the whole gambit of genetic allele testing. Number two, obviously if you're gluten sensitive, if your testing comes back positive, eliminate gluten. Number three, measure inflammation. Ask your doctor to check you for inflammation, because remember, one of the things that causes leaky brain and sets the stage for all this is inflammation. Now, part of it may be gluten-induced inflammation, so that's a possibility, but one of the things that you can do is, if you're trying to be objective, is to measure whether or not you have the inflammation in the first place, so that you can monitor it as you change your diet, right? So there's a test called C-reactive protein, and specifically HS-CRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein. It's a great test. There's another one called erythrocyte sedimentation rate, another good test to help measure systemic inflammation levels. Ferritin can also be used to measure as an inflammatory marker. So these are good ones, along with homocysteine, which I talked about earlier. So ask your doctor to measure these compounds, because if they're elevated, you want to monitor it as you're changing your diet. You want to monitor it and make sure these things are coming down, because if they're not coming down, there may be something else for you that's leading to chronic inflammation that's damaging your nerve tissue. And so you don't want to be remiss. You don't want to leave anything out. But again, if we're going down the pathway of looking at gluten as the potential first trigger, the fourth thing rather that I would encourage you to do is have your nutrient levels checked. Nutrient levels are critical because, again, if you've got years of gluten exposure, you're malnourished, years of inflammation, you're malnourished. Figure out what it is for you. I've seen cases where, I was almost sure somebody was B12 deficient. When I ran their testing, they weren't, but they may have had a copper deficiency or a different nutrient deficiency that was also impacting their nervous system. So don't guess at this. Remember, the longer you wait, the worse the condition gets, the longer it's going to take for you to heal. So you really want to get your doctor involved in this as early in the interim as possible. Don't wait on this. And then the number five action step I'll encourage you to take is to look at other foods, because it's not always gluten. There's other foods that sometimes can be the triggers for the reaction. And for some people, gluten causes food sensitivities and food allergies to develop because of the leaky gut. So you can develop reactions to other foods as a result of gluten exposure. So checking for other foods can become very important. That way because remember what's changeable. What can we be empowered to do? We can change our diet. That's super, super easy to do, especially if you're struggling and your quality of life is poor because of neurological disease. And so diet change is one of the simplest things in the world, but don't guess. Right? Get granular, get detail-oriented information so that you can dive in and take some serious action. So those are just, again, some walkaways. You can walk away from the show today with an understanding that these things can all be measured, these things can all be checked. If you're struggling, they should be being checked, and you can take some serious action toward moving away from neurological disease. All right, let's open it up for any questions that you guys have. Let's see here. So I like this. So Barb says, I think my tell when I get exposed is brain fog, which is again, it's a symptom. It's a neurological symptom that can be associated with gluten sensitivity. So she goes on to say, think about doing something, walk a few steps, then forget what I was going to do. So that brain fog where you're walking somewhere and you just forget why you were going. How do I recover quickly from exposure? Unfortunately, there's no great, super speedy, quick way to recover from neurological damage. The quickest way, honestly, is take action, is not to wait, because the longer you wait, the more damage you've accumulated over time, the longer that's going to take to heal. So the important thing is don't wait to get testing done. Is there a link with gluten and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder? Yes, there is. It's another one of the neurological conditions that we know that gluten can cause or contribute to. Okay, could leaky brain cause multiple chemical sensitivities? In my experience, multiple chemical sensitivities are typically manifest not from leaky brain, but they're manifest originally from leaky gut. Now, again, once you have leaky gut, all bets are off. You can develop what's called leaky barrier syndrome, LBS. Leaky barrier syndrome, your blood-brain barrier is affected, your kidney barrier can become affected, your ureter barriers can become affected. So a lot of your barrier tissues start to break down when you have chronic systemic inflammation. How long does it take for a brain or spinal cord lesion like MS to develop after having eaten gluten? It's one of those things, LD, that it's a great question. And it's different for different people, but generally speaking, if you're looking at, let's just make some room here. If you're looking at MS just doesn't develop overnight. It's a chronic neurological inflammatory disorder. and it's years in the making. But some of the very early warning symptoms that I've seen in patients, one of them is a foot drop. So if if you're exercising and then you start noticing that you can't fully lift your foot as well, that's called a foot drop, and it's can be an early manifestation or an early warning sign of MS. So if that's happening, so again, this is MS early. Another really early warning sign is numbness and tingling in the hands or feet. Again, these are early. This is before the demyelinization has gotten so severe. It can take decades. I mean, a lot of times 3 to 4, times 10 if we're talking about decades. So 30 to 40 years when you're doing an MRI. So if we're doing like a brain or spinal cord MRI on somebody, and we're looking for what's called a white matter lesion or a demyelinating lesion, it can take that long for it to even show up. I've had cases where people had normal MRIs, fast forward 6-7 years, and now they have demyelinating lesions that are showing up. So it's not a quick process, which again is why it's so important to get it checked out early. Don't wait around. In my opinion, is if you're working with your doctor, your neurologist, don't take no for an answer. Really work with them and don't let them brush you off. Let's see here. Love it. Eileen says, thanks for all your knowledge and information. It's changing my life. Love that. I love that we're impacting you, Eileen. Thanks for sharing. Hi, Dr. O. Have celiac and ataxia. Is 500 milligrams of vitamin C enough to overcome deficiency for brain and generally and improve ferritin levels as well? 500 milligrams of vitamin C is it's like trying to spit on a forest fire wand. It doesn't do much. I mean, if you're talking about chronic inflammatory disease that you're trying to support your body through, vitamin C, I wouldn't, generally I would take a person to bowel tolerance. And so bowel tolerance vitamin C, generally you take as much as you can tolerate without having diarrhea, or having severe gastrointestinal upset, gas or bloating. So for most people, that's at least 5 grams. So you're at 1/10 of that quantity if you're only at 500 milligrams. Let's see, Sherry. Dr. Osborne, I tested positive for gluten sensitivity, have microscopic colitis, 25 years. My memory's become so bad. I'm not sure I see the question in that. Sherry, maybe come back and ask the question. But, the first thing you need to do, Sherry, honestly, if you've had microscopic colitis for 25 years and you've started to develop memory issues, is probably because your diet's not dialed in as well enough as it should be. And so if you don't know the difference between a gluten-free diet, like a traditional gluten-free diet, and the true gluten-free diet, which is what I write about in my book, No Grain, No Pain, then get you a copy. If if you're on a budget, go to the library and check a copy out, but get you a copy and read it and really get your diet dialed in first. Can LPS form a biofilm? No, LPS doesn't form a biofilm. Bacteria form biofilms. LPS is a product of the bacteria, just like biofilms are products of bacteria. But LPS can be in or within biofilms. So oftentimes people that have heavy biofilm formation in their GI tract, you can actually measure LPS there as well. Is IgG deficiency possible to repair? Yeah, Elizabeth, it is. Actually, we've got some really great case studies that we've published on our YouTube channel on IgG deficiency diseases, where people have recovered, even to the chagrin of their other doctors. So yes, it is possible. As far as how does that happen, there's 4 primary things that have to be addressed. Diet is number 1. It's very, very important to get the right food and to get the wrong food out. Number 2 is investigation of chemical exposures, because a number of different chemicals will create an overburden on the immune system. So measuring and monitoring for chemical exposures. Number 3 is looking at microbial balance within the gut, within your microbiome itself, because oftentimes those imbalances contribute to inflammation. And then number 4 is testing and understanding where you're at nutritionally, whether you have nutritional deficit, whether your gut is properly digesting nutrients from the food that you're eating. those have to be done as kind of a backbone to get anywhere. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark. And I see this all the time. People that come to see me, they're shooting in the dark for 5 or 10 years, trying this supplement because they heard this, whatever it was. Maybe they heard a podcast, or maybe they heard one of these summits online, and they heard a doctor talking about how great this supplement was for that problem. And it may be. I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't get educated and shouldn't learn about it, but it's guessing. If you don't test on yourself, it's really hard to get granular and unique about yourself. So get yourself tested. Let's see here. I ate wheat pasta for lunch, regretting that now for sure. Yeah, I would agree. I would regret that if that were me too. Betty, let's see here. Years I made school snacks for end of year with granddaughter. Almost had a bite. Don't see a question in that. Can fatty liver and diabetes cause the same leaky brain symptoms? I mean, fatty liver is usually a manifestation it can be a manifestation of a number of different things, but oftentimes gluten is associated with fatty liver. There's actually some really strong evidence and research, and I've seen this in the clinic as well, where people go gluten-free and their pre-existing fatty liver problems go away, and that's been confirmed by ultrasounds and other tests and liver enzyme tests. So there is a connection, but you've got to figure out why that fatty liver's there. So Barb says, I had migraines in my 30s, depression in my 50s, and finally seizures in my late 60s. I believe it. That's the progression, and sometimes that's the way neurological disease will manifest. It's not always the same. Sometimes it migrates. Sometimes it changes, and you got to be aware of that as well. Let's see. I like that. Ed says, I believe my nerve damage is getting better. I love to hear that. I love it. If you guys have success stories you want to share, pump those in too, because that just feeds me. I feed you, you feed me. That's the deal, right? Let's see here. Let's scroll down on both sides. I love this question. Patricia wants to know, how is it that centenarians in Italy eat pasta and free-range meats, a glass of wine, and just keep going over 100? I'm 80-ish and am focusing on 100, but do not eat gluten. There's a lot of reasons why, Patricia, I think that we could answer that question. The biggest issue with the centenarians is they have a quality of life that is much less stressful. They're family-oriented. They're like, unlike in America, one of the reasons Americans and Britons and folks in major industrialized countries are so unhealthy is, some of them are gluten sensitive and they do have gluten issues, but a lot of them have overwhelming stress. Their lifestyles are revolved around go, work, right? And so they are overworking themselves and overstressing themselves, putting themselves into an early grave. But then there's also some of the ramifications for what we look at. The centenarians, if you look at their diet, they're very calorie restricted. They don't eat a lot of food. They eat very, very small portions. And unlike in the U.S. and other industrialized countries where you go to get a bowl of pasta at a restaurant, and it's enough to feed a village for a week in some places, right? I mean, people really overdo it. I mean, just at the last count, I think it was wheat was 50% of the total caloric intake in the United States per person, wheat alone, all by itself. So I think part of why they can live longer is they have lower stress. There certainly are lower chemical exposures. They have family-oriented lives, and they have more of a heart-centered lifestyle. So those things matter too. Remember, all health and illness is not just about gluten, but I'm glad you asked the question because it does come up a lot. Would shingles reoccurring pain be related to gluten exposure? I'm celiac. Stress seems to wake up that shingles feeling in my arm. It can. So, I mean, shingles are a type of herpes virus that go dormant in the ganglion in your spine. And stress can wake them up. Gluten can wake them up. I mean, there are a number of different things that can wake them up. One of the things that can wake them up, because we're seeing a lot of this in men, is that men that are taking these erectile dysfunction supplements, there are certain amino acids, like, for example, arginine. High dosing arginine over long periods of time causes lysine deficiency, interferes with lysine. Lysine is one of the primary amino acids that helps prevent a viral overload or a viral outbreak. And so we'll see a lot of people develop shingles because they're using arginine-based supplements. So be aware of that as well. Vitamin D, 50,000 units, ended my 18 years of restless leg syndrome. I love that story. After every horrid medication they gave me, doctors from nurses all the way up to movement specialists, adding vitamin D was the trick. I didn't even talk about vitamin D tonight, but vitamin D is so critical for nervous system function and so critical for immunoregulation. It plays a role in preserving the interior of the blood-brain barrier, preserving the integrity of the gut barrier. So vitamin D is very, very important. Also, linkage between vitamin D and MS. Jill, I was diagnosed with MS 19 years ago. In the past 2 years, I've had issues with walking and a shaking right arm and numbing of both hands. My PA said that I should stop eating gluten. I agree with your PA. It's probably not a bad piece of advice. The best I can do to avoid gluten, I'm doing the best I can do to avoid gluten, but unfortunately crossed paths with my gluten-free, and my walking has become worse. Not sure I understand what you mean by that, but Jill, I would give you the same advice I gave earlier, which is get a copy of No Grain, No Pain and understand what it means to give up gluten. Most people that go gluten-free struggle with symptoms, persistent symptoms, because they're doing the diet wrong and then they think the diet's not working. And then understand that any of you that are gluten-free newbies, there can be a 2 to 4 week time frame where you actually feel worse going gluten-free before you feel better, and that has to do with the gluten effect. So there's certain proteins found within gluten that act like morphine, and if you're one of those that have that addictive quality, you could actually be addicted to that gluten. When you get off of it, you actually withdraw, and that can make you feel worse. Let's see here. I have nerve damage. Is it possible to heal it with a grain-free diet? It is, if your nerve damage is somehow being caused or contributed to by the grains. But absolutely, I've seen people with nerve damage heal repetitively over and over again. Let's see. I'm not sure I understand. So Cherie's asking, what if you have already, I'm assuming you mean what if you don't eat gluten already? Again, how many of you, raise your hand in the room tonight, those of you listening, if you don't know the difference between traditional gluten-free and true gluten-free, just be honest and raise your hand and say yes, and don't feel bad if you have to say that. And if you do, if you're one of those that say yes, you need to read No Grain, No Pain, or you need to take my master class, my gluten master class, which is free. You don't even have to buy anything to take that class. Let's just pump the link up for the class, but you can go to glutenology.net/registration, and you can sign up free, no charge. It's just 14 hours of information that you need to have if you truly are trying to go on a gluten-free diet. Otherwise, like I said, most people do it wrong and they continue to struggle. Has No Grain, No Pain been translated into Portuguese? No, it hasn't, unfortunately. I'd love to see that happen. We've got demand for Spanish, we've got demand for Portuguese, but it's up to the publisher, and I unfortunately don't have any control over that. GI doctor told me not to take vitamin D unless test shows it's low. It's not bad advice, but it also depends on what they're calling low and which tests they're running in order to assess your vitamin D status. Let's see here. I love that. Marie shared, yes, used to have migraines a lot, but since going gluten and grain-free, no more migraines and sinus infections or upper respiratory infections. So you quit battling your food, right? And when you quit battling your food, it's amazing what your body can do to heal. Is there a connection between gluten and Parkinson's? There is, and I've seen cases. Now, Parkinson's also got a lot of other connections. There's a connection between Parkinson's and aluminum, Parkinson's and heavy metal toxicity. I've seen connections with Parkinson's. I've seen connections with Parkinson's and different nutritional deficits as well. So with gluten and Parkinson's, I wouldn't expect a person with full-blown Parkinson's to go on a gluten-free diet and have a reversal of Parkinson's. They really got to do a deeper dive on a lot of the other nutritional elements as well. It's one of those neurological diseases, at least in my experience, that is it responds, but it doesn't fully respond because there's multiple factors involved with it. Let's see here. My 12-year-old recently told me that his hands randomly shake. He is sensitive to gluten. Just found out that all grains have gluten, so I took him off of all of them. Can that be a symptom? Yes, it can be. As a matter of fact, Nicole, I was brought into a court case. I had a interesting story. So a mother brought her children in to see me. It was actually two of her sons, and they both had neurological symptoms. One of them was having seizures. The other one just had kind of what was called a resting hand tremor. And she brought them in, and we tested them. They were both gluten sensitive. Going gluten-free helped both of them. It got one completely off of his seizure medicine, and the other one's hands definitely calmed down and were not shaking. And then what happened was the father didn't really want to go gluten-free. And so anyways, those two parents were getting a divorce, and the kids would go to the father's house, and he would feed them gluten, and one of them would have seizures, the other would have tremor. And there's a condition called essential tremor, which is actually, there's some linkage to gluten with that as well. But when they go back to mom's, of course, that would be worse, and she would get upset. So anyway, she ended up taking the father to court, and they drugged me into this case. I don't like to go to the courtroom, but in this case, I was representing those kids, and so they wanted my expert testimony. So I was there to tell the judge these kids should be gluten-free. So anyway, we got an order against the father to quit feeding those children gluten, and their problems went away. And so to help give you hopefully some light at the end of the tunnel for your 12-year-old, that there is the potential possibility that gluten is playing a role in that, and it should be investigated. Again, I want to be real careful when I say that not all people's neurological problems are only gluten, right? So a lot of times it's gluten, and sometimes it's other things. And this is where when you work with your doctor, you work with that great relationship to be thorough and investigate the things that need to be investigated. But don't take, there's the old, oh, you have a problem, we don't know what causes it. Don't take that as the full solution. If you do that, you're going to end up on medicine, and there's no solution in that, not long term. Let's see here. Jonah from Germany, from Cologne. Hi, Jonah. Nice to have you on the show. I was in Cologne about 2.5 years ago. We got to tour the cathedral there. That was a really, really wonderful experience. Let's see, next question. When you inadvertently consume gluten, what should one do? And do you have a gluten enzyme product that you can recommend? Yes, it's called Gluten Shield. Go over to glutenfreesociety.org. You need to, if you're eating out, if you're traveling, if you want, some degree of support during that time, you really need to look at keeping Gluten Shield handy. We also have a gluten-free recovery bundle that you can check out. It's a supplement bundle that's designed to help support you overcoming inflammation as you get gluten exposure, and you can just type that into the search. Maybe we can get Mel to pump that into the feed for you as well. Let's see. Let's see. That's not a question. So is there research that suggests lemon seeds shouldn't be consumed? We get rid of them when making smoothies, for instance. I really don't recommend eating seeds as a part of your means for your staple diet, because seeds contain ingredients that can act as slow poisons or gut toxins. And so eating seeds, just as a general rule, is not a great idea if you're doing it on a regular basis, especially. Yeah, so Nanya says, my eyes will be off when any gluten is hiding in something I have eaten. Blurry or double vision, is this a type of migraine? It can be, yeah. So blurry and double vision can be a type of migraine. It can also be kind of an earlier warning symptom, as I was talking earlier with MS. Double vision is sometimes one of the early neurological symptoms associated with that. What is the root cause of degenerative disc disease and cervical spine instability? I get a lot of neck pain and headaches. Can I reverse it? There's a lot of root causes for that. I mean, degenerative disc disease, in my experience, is inflammation for most people. It's a combination of poor posture over time, inflammation over time, and subsequently poor nutrition over time. And so you really need to get a doctor who understands those elements all very well and can get you treated properly. Is L-glutamine good to use to help with leaky gut? It is. As a matter of fact, L-glutamine is the primary fuel source for the cells of the gut, which is one of the reasons why it's used in a lot of leaky gut formulations. Oh, come on, this has got to be a trick question. Is it okay to drink every day like a half a pint and 1 beer a day? Not if you're gluten sensitive. Is that a trick question? I kind of just have to wonder, but I mean, if you're gluten sensitive, obviously you don't want to drink beer. It's got gluten in it, so bad idea in that regard. Can celiac disease kill you in the long run if you keep consuming gluten every now and then? Yes, it can. I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was like don't quote me on this because I don't want to say something and be wrong, but I'm fairly confident that it was a 70% greater risk of death for people with gluten sensitivity that continued to eat gluten. Let's see, what is the one best food to fight inflammation? Fasting. The one best food is no food. If you're trying to fight inflammation, especially in the interim, intermittent fasting is a great strategy. The 16-8 pattern works really well for a lot of people, depending on your blood sugar and your blood sugar control. Some people do better with full 24-hour day fasts several times a month to help them recover quicker. But fasting, by hands down, by far, is one of the best things that you can do, because when it comes to, when you ask the question, what one food is the best at fighting inflammation, there isn't one, because everybody's different. And I've seen, I had a patient one time that was terminally ill, 6 months to live, and she was reactive to blueberries. So I mean, blueberries is a great superfood that helps fight inflammation, but for that little girl, it was killing her. So, one man's food is another's poison, and so this is where fasting is no one's poison. Fasting can help with inflammation and help with recovery, help with generation of stem cells, help with the secretion of certain hormones that help in dampening the inflammatory response. But if you're reactive to the food, even if it's a superfood, you can have problems with it. Okay, let's see. Collagen for leaky gut? Yes and no. Collagen is very rich protein, and some people can't tolerate it very well. And it actually makes their guts worse. And some people, collagen does phenomenally well for them and makes them feel a lot better. So it depends on the individual. As far as resistant starch, same thing, depends on the individual. There are vast variety of differences from one person to the next. Some people tolerate resistant starch very well. Some people don't tolerate it at all. It causes, like SIBO-like symptoms, severe bloating, severe gas. Let's scroll down on that left side. Faith's asking if we take on new clients in our office, and the answer is yes. You just have to reach out. You just have to reach out to us. We do. Let's keep scrolling down. Can you eat too much meat? Yes and no. I mean, define what too much means. I think the problem with esoteric terminology is, what does too much mean? And again, it depends on who you are as a person. So like, let's say that you're exercising very aggressively and you need extra protein. Or let's say that you're a young teenager and you're growing and you're going through growth spurts. You might need more protein, right? And a lot of people, they like to view protein and meat as all or none. And you really want to look at it dynamically as, is it the right chapter in your life right now to eat more protein? Because a lot of people that are struggling with gluten-related neuropathy or neurological damage need more protein to aid in their recovery and their healing. And so they may need to eat more meat, the right kinds of meat, but they need to maybe eat more of it, at least initially. That doesn't mean they have to go full-blown carnivore for the rest of their life. Actually, I think that there might be some detriment to that in the very, very long term. And some people, need more protein than others. So I think it just depends on who the person is. But again, this is why I'm such a fan of objective measuring, because without measurements, it's all guesswork. And you can guess about your own health better than anyone else can, but a lot of times, people guess and they guess wrong, and that's one of the reasons they maintain their illness. What do I think about alpha lipoic acid as a chelator of heavy metals like mercury? It's good. I like alpha lipoic acid. Use it quite frequently. I actually have my own formula of thiactic acid called Alpha Max, and we use it in metal detoxification type protocols. But by itself, alpha lipoic acid is not going to pull everything if you've got heavy contamination with metal. So alpha lipoic acid is great, but it should be used in conjunction with other things. Let's see here. Would tinnitus be considered a neurological problem if it wasn't due to noise? Yes. So I've seen a number of people with tinnitus where the problems start to go away going on a gluten-free diet. Now that being said, I've seen people with tinnitus and their problem didn't go away on a gluten-free diet. But it's a good place to start. Remember that you have there's a cranial nerve called the vestibulocochlear nerve, and it feeds your inner ear. And so a lot of times that nerve gets damaged. And again, gluten as a neurotoxin can create damage to that nerve, leading to tinnitus. But that nerve can also be damaged due to repetitive loud noises and other things. So it's not just gluten. But again, if you suspect gluten, it's a good place to start. Can vaccines cause gluten sensitivity? I haven't seen any compelling evidence that shows that vaccines cause gluten sensitivity, not directly. I mean, we could hypothesize, I think, about it, but I don't think I've seen any really great compelling evidence that that's the case. FDA is starting to try to go after certain supplements. Yeah, that's interesting, right? So the stuff that worked for Rona, like NAC's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal amino acid, and it's a supplement, and it's also been FDA approved as a mucolytic drug, and they're trying to go after it because it's been approved for both, but it's been sold as a safe supplement for a number of years. Whether or not they'll pull NAC off the market or be successful at that, I don't know. My advice to you would be, if you use NAC on a regular basis and you find it to be very helpful, start buying it, because there's a possibility. Although I don't want to create fear buying mode for any of you, but there is a possibility that it could be taken off the market. If you have inflammation, is it good to take probiotics? I was told that they make the inflammation worse. I don't know who told you that, Sue, but that's a pretty rudimentary answer. Probiotics don't make inflammation worse, typically. If you have inflammation, and where probiotics can create a problem, in my experience, is certain probiotics have a tendency to support higher histamine levels. And so if you have a problem with histamine in your diet, high histamine foods, and some probiotics can cause exacerbation. But as a general rule of thumb, taking probiotics does not increase or cause or contribute to or prevent your inflammation from going away. Let's see here. When can we buy your products in Australia? Anthony, we are working on that solution. No Grain, No Pain is available in Australia, the book. So you can. We do have a publishing agreement with the Aussies on the book. And we're working on a solution, on a shipping solution for Australia. So we'll keep you up to date as that happens. But we're hoping to have it fixed and hopefully having it dialed in here in the next month or so. So hopefully we'll see that happen. Same thing with Canada. So those of you looking to look at getting some of our products in Canada, we're working on that solution. So Laura asks, where do you see people? So in my clinic in Sugar Land, Texas is where I see people. So you can look me up. We can post that link in the feed as well. Let's see. Best testing to see if you're gluten sensitive. I mentioned that earlier. That's genetic testing. HLA-DQ genetic testing is absolutely hands down the most accurate way to understand whether or not your body has the genetic predisposition to react to gluten. So you can do that even internationally. You can do that through Gluten-Free Society. There's genetic testing available. So if you have a doctor that's unwilling to work with you, I would encourage you to go to Gluten-Free Society and get tested. My doctor told me don't eat gluten to see what happens. I don't recommend that attitude. It's not that not eating gluten is going to hurt you, but you have to understand that going gluten-free is about a 12-week commitment. I mean, you really have to commit 12 weeks of your life just to learning what it really truly means to go gluten-free. Where are the cross-contamination risks? If you travel, what are the risks? I mean, there's just so much to consider. This is part of why I created a 14-hour masterclass just on how to do it. And that's just really, that's scratching the surface as it relates to experience. So I don't recommend dabbling in diets. You either know you need to do it and commit to it because it's a permanent commitment, or you don't. But I've just seen too many people dabble in the diet. They did it wrong, it didn't work, and then they thought, oh, that diet doesn't work for me, and then they go on struggling in their health because they did it wrong. I mean, it happens all the time, so don't dabble. Again, test, don't guess. Let's see here. So somebody's saying they did take NAC off the market 3 weeks ago. No, they didn't take NAC off the market. So I just going to, for points of clarity here, NAC was removed from Amazon because Amazon as a company made a policy decision to remove it, but they didn't take it off the market for a legal reason. There was no legal reason for them to do that. They made it as just their general policy that we're pulling all NAC supplements. But NAC is not illegal to purchase. It is still a supplement. It is still available over the counter. We carry it on Gluten Free Society. But I just they didn't take it off the market. You want to understand that difference very clearly. Is white willow complex okay for people with tinnitus? Yes. Yes, it is. It's perfectly fine. And it's perfectly fine for, if you have UC, you can take it as well. Is it okay to eat sorghum? Not if you're trying to be gluten-free, not if you're on a true gluten-free diet. Do I think that VA doctors, is that veterans hospital doctors will do genetic testing? Maybe. I mean, you can just ask your doc. I can just tell you, I trained in the VA hospital. I actually trained in the rheumatology department there at the hospital here in Houston. And I can tell you they probably wouldn't have done it, but that doesn't mean that, you shouldn't ask. Always ask. What's the worst thing that can happen is they can tell you no. And if you're a veteran, and you're going to the hospital and you can get it covered, you should ask because you should get it covered. So my good friend just had radioactive IV with her CT scan. What can she do to help pull radiation out? One of the best things for general radiation is iodine, but it also depends on what kind of radiation she had. But iodine's a simple supplement, and it's great. It's when Fukushima happened, iodine storage or iodine, there was an iodine shortage in the world because they were using iodine to offset the radiation from Fukushima. So iodine's very, very an excellent choice in terms of supplements for supporting that. Okay, go down on that. Yeah, there we go. Gosh, so many of you are asking about the vaccine. I'm going to I'll end the show tonight with just kind of a short answer. And this is not me telling you what you should do in your own personal life about the vaccine. That's a decision you need to make. But I will just say this. A lot of people ask me about it, and the simple answer I can give you is, number one, this vaccine's not approved. And if you don't know the difference between approval and emergency use authorization, you need to look that up. For a drug to be approved, it has to go through rigorous trials, and that can take very long time, years, and sometimes tens of years to get approval. Emergency use authorization is a very different thing. It means we're going to do this despite the potential risks and consequences of negative side effects over the perception that there's a threat, an emergency threat that's out there. So again, this has not been approved. It's been approved for emergency use, and it's not the same thing as going through the rigor of scientific scrutiny. It hasn't even passed phase 3 trials yet. And so a lot of people are getting this thing, not even giving it time to go through even the initial basic fundamental science that's supposed to be done. So, any of you that have autoimmune disease, in my opinion, even based on the manufacturers of these different vaccines will tell you that we don't have data on people with autoimmune disease. We don't really recommend it. But a lot of practicing doctors are saying because you have autoimmune disease, you should take it. And in my opinion, those doctors are irresponsible when they're saying that, because even the manufacturer of these drugs won't won't support that. The other thing I would ask you to just think about, again, you make your own decision, but I would just ask you to think, if these were safe, why won't insurance companies cover them? If they were safe, if they were truly safe, why won't insurance carriers cover the damage that's going to be caused or that could potentially be caused if you get one? It's because they don't have the data either. And generally, there's an old saying, money talks, BS walks, follow the money, right? We have all kinds of anecdote cliches that we could use about money, but at the end of the day, we don't have safety data to make any kind of justification for this policy that's been instituted in this promotion of this mass vaccination without science. It's my opinion, and so do with that with what you will. But a lot of you feel like you're being pressured or you're being coerced. I would just simply encourage you to get educated. Do more to get educated about the potential side effects, the pitfalls, the dangers, the rapidity of which this test was evolved, the potential problems associated with using messenger RNA and using some of the ingredients within the vaccines like propylene glycol. There's now a new ingredient in one of the vaccines that we know is a carcinogen that has just been identified recently by an investigative reporter. So, I mean, if those are the things that you want to do, that again, I'll leave that up to you. I don't like to get too heavy into that topic, but I'll leave it there. Okay. So that should wrap it up. We got more questions, but we got next week too. So make sure you come back next week. We're going to talk more health. If you've got questions, bring them to me. Hey, look, do me a favor. If you are new to the show and you haven't yet subscribed and you want to get more of our information or access our archives from previous shows, we've got over 1,000 shows here, folks. We've got 1,000 hours of video that you can peruse through and learn and get educated and share with people who you think might need this information as well. All you have to do to get access to that is come visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. Sign up for our free newsletter. We're going to send you a number of different free resources that you can tap into to help restore and recapture your health if you're struggling, or just to help get great education if you're doing well, but you just want to continue to endeavor to learn. So thanks for spending your Monday evening with me. I wish you excellent health and an excellent week. We'll see you next Monday for an episode of Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Take care. Hey, don't forget to tune in next week, same time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time, for another Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain show. Bring all your toughest health questions to me. I look forward to answering them. And before you leave today, make sure you hit subscribe. And once you do, click that bell. That bell is going to allow us to remind you right before we go live, but it's also going to allow us to remind you when we come out with other video content all week long. We've got lots of episodes coming your way all week long, and I don't want you to miss anything. So again, subscribe, hit that bell so that you can get notified when we have that new information put up for you. Thanks so much, and I'm wishing you excellent health. Have a great week. We'll see you next Monday night.